I can't stand having someone live here all the time. Your mom needs her own space. She's always there." I stood behind the lavender bush, holding a small bowl of food for the kitten, my heart clenched as if someone had wrapped their fist around it. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I wasn't trying to. The words just floated out from the half-open window, from my daughter-in-law's mouth. My son Ethan's reply was a sigh. Just a sigh. He didn't defend me, not a word. I turned around and walked slowly back to the guest house behind the garden. The night air was cool, but something inside me had cracked. I knew in that moment I was no longer welcome here. My name is Maggie. I'm 67 years old. I used to be a librarian, someone who spent her whole life in silence and order. I thought I'd grow old the same way I had lived, gently, quietly, bothering no one. But I was wrong. 3 months ago, I slipped in the bathroom and broke my hip. The doctor said I'd need at least 6 months to recover. My son Ethan offered to let me stay in his guest house while I healed. "You shouldn't do this alone anymore, Mom," he said with gentle concern. I cried when he said that. Ethan is my only child. I raised him on my own after his father left us. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, wore the same shoes for years, just to make sure he could go to college. I never asked for anything. All I wanted was for him to have a better life. At first, living at Ethan's house felt like love. The guest house was small but cozy, its own entrance, a tiny kitchen, a flat-screen TV. Chloe, his wife, even left a warm wool blanket on my bed. I thought, they really care. But that blanket only stayed warm for a few days. Soon, I started to feel unnecessary. Chloe stopped greeting me in the morning. Ethan no longer invited me for dinner. One day, I knocked on the main house door to ask for some honey, and I heard footsteps backing away, but no one opened it. The main house got a passcode lock. The thermostat in my guest house was locked too. Things disappeared from my little fridge: an apple, a slice of cheese, sometimes my favorite tea bags. I didn't ask. I didn't dare. I was afraid of what I might hear. But tonight I heard more than enough. I sat in the wooden chair by the window, leaving the lights off. Moonlight filtered softly through the curtains. I looked down at my wrinkled hands, now trembling. These were the hands that once held my baby through feverish nights, that signed student loan papers for him, that baked birthday cakes with only flour and egg whites when we had nothing else. And now those same hands belonged to someone his wife couldn't stand to be around. I asked myself, was I still a mother, or had I become just a burden in this house? I started noticing the little things. The thermostat in the guest house no longer let me adjust the temperature. Every night, the cold settled deeper into my bones. I added another blanket, but still felt the chill. I searched everywhere for the remote control to the heater. It was gone. I asked Chloe softly one afternoon on the porch, "Have you seen the thermostat remote?" She smiled without looking up and replied, "You probably just misplaced it," then walked away as if I were made of air. In that moment, I felt painfully small, and all I did was ask a simple question. Meals became increasingly rare. Some weeks, I didn't see my son at all. My texts went unanswered. I heard laughter and clinking dishes coming from the main house on weekends. But no one invited me over. I was an outsider in my own family's backyard. One evening, I deliberately stepped into the main house during dinner. Chloe looked up and froze for a second. Then she chuckled. "Oh, you startled me, Mom. Would you like some food? Ethan's cooking's a bit salty tonight." She said it with a smile, but the air in the room had shifted, heavy and tight. I caught a fleeting glance between her and Ethan. just a moment, but I saw it. They didn't want me there. One morning, I went out to collect the mail and found the mailbox locked with a passcode. No warning. A little note taped to the guest house door read, "For safety purposes, please ask Ethan to retrieve your mail." I didn't know whether to feel sad or angry. That was my mailbox. Those were my bills, my letters, my postcards from old friends I still waited months to receive. And now, I had to ask my son for permission to read my own mail. I opened the tiny kitchen cupboard where I kept my tea, cookies, and spices, and saw my old tin box was missing. Inside it were black tea leaves I'd brought from my hometown, the same kind my mother used to brew every afternoon when I was a girl. That tea wasn't just tea, it was memory. I looked everywhere. It was gone. The guest house isn't large enough for anything to just go missing. Then I looked at the window, still partly open. A faint smear in the dust near the latch, like something had been touched. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to become the forgetful, paranoid old woman. But the incidents were piling up, one after another, and the cold I felt inside me grew heavier with each passing day. I used to think, maybe I'm imagining it. But that night, when I stepped into the garden and heard Chloe's voice say what she said, I knew. It wasn't in my head. I was truly not welcome here. I always thought I was the only one with a key to the guest house. But as it turns out, I was painfully naive. One afternoon, while looking for my old notepad, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I never used that drawer, or so I thought. But there, tucked into the very back, was a brown envelope. I pulled it out. Inside was a stack of documents stamped with a law firm's letterhead. I meant to just glance over it to see who it belonged to, but then my heart stopped. My name was on them, on copies of a financial power of attorney, on a property transfer agreement, and worst of all, my signature, printed neatly at the bottom of every page. But I had never seen these papers before, and I knew that wasn't my handwriting. My hands began to tremble. I flipped through page after page, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. Each document was a quiet betrayal. My authority over my assets, my bank accounts, even decisions about my living arrangements. All of it had been reassigned to Ethan, my son, the boy I raised on my own, for whom I sacrificed everything. Now he had forged my signature to take control of my life without a word, without decency, without shame. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my chest tightening, but that wasn't all. A soft beep came from my phone, the one I always left charging near the kitchen. I suddenly remembered, a few days ago, Chloe had asked to borrow my phone, just to check a map. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but today I opened the tiny camera I had installed in the kitchen. A little gadget meant to capture my kitten playing during the day. I pulled up the footage. There she was, Chloe, standing at the kitchen counter with my phone in hand. She angled it toward the light and quickly snapped a photo of the screen, where my bank account password was displayed. Stealthy, quick, no hesitation. I don't remember how long I sat there on the edge of the bed, but I do remember that for the first time in years. I was afraid of my own child, not just disappointed, not simply hurt, afraid. I had always thought that if anything ever destroyed me, it would be illness, age, weakness. But now I knew, what breaks you fastest is betrayal from the one you love the most. I gripped the stack of papers, shoved them under the bed, and something inside me shifted. If this was a house where they thought I had no more value, then maybe it was time to remind them. I still have a voice. I didn't ask, I didn't confront, I didn't leave, I chose silence. Not because I forgave them, but because I was too stunned to know where to begin. Each morning I pretended nothing had happened. I trimmed the basil in the garden, fed the kitten, brewed a weak cup of tea from reused bags, and sent Ethan a message. "Have a good day, son." There was never a reply. I lived like a polite ghost, quiet enough not to disturb, invisible enough not to be noticed. The guest house, once a place of peace, now felt like a box. I realized I had no control over the thermostat, no key to the mailbox, no access to the Wi-Fi. Everything I used was borrowed. Chloe no longer spoke to me. Ethan avoided me. Whenever I neared the main house, I could hear footsteps pause, voices drop. One day I knocked on their door just to ask for some honey. Chloe opened it slightly, holding a wine glass. "Oh, hi, Mom. I'm on a Zoom call with a client. I'll tell Ethan, okay?" Then she gently closed the door, like she was returning something she didn't need to the drawer. I thought about the years behind me, when I was the one making decisions, when I held Ethan's hand through fevers, taught him to read, to write, to button his shirt before school. I remembered freezing winter nights, walking home from my night shift at the library just to save money for his tutoring. I never expected to be repaid, but I never imagined I'd be pushed aside like this. One night I woke at 3 a.m., not from a nightmare. Just because I was cold, I got up to find another blanket. As I opened the closet, I noticed something was missing. The old tea tin my mother gave me. That tin was the only keepsake I brought here. Inside were black tea leaves she used to brew every afternoon when I was a child. That scent held memories of home, of warmth, of her hands. And now it was gone. No explanation, no apology, no concern. I sat alone in the dark, hands trembling, staring at nothing. I didn't cry loudly. I just let the tears fall, one by one, onto the back of my hand. These were tears no one would see. No one cared to ask, "Are you okay, Mom?" I began keeping a journal, not to complain, but to remember who I was. On one page I wrote, "My name is Maggie. I used to be a mother. I used to be a strong woman. Now I don't know who I am." Then one afternoon, as the sun dipped over the roof, I sat on the steps and saw something simple. A small sparrow was fluttering against the window pane. It had been trapped there since morning. Chloe saw it, Ethan saw it, but no one moved. I walked over quietly, opened the latch. The bird flew out instantly, as if it had never been desperate, and in that moment I realized I too was trapped, and the only lock was fear. I didn't know what I would do. I didn't have a plan, but I knew this: I would not die in silence, and I would not let them decide my fate ever again. They thought I didn't know, but I did, and more importantly, I was beginning to remember who I used to be. 1 week after discovering my signature had been forged, I still hadn't said a word. I kept brewing my tea, feeding the kitten, sending Ethan my morning text, "Have a peaceful day, my son." There was no reply, but it didn't sting the way it used to. I had moved on from crying to recording. Each night I opened a worn leather notebook, the kind I once used to log borrowed books at the library. Now it held something far more valuable: the truth. May 12th, tea tin missing. May 14th, saw Chloe screenshotting my phone. May 16th, fake documents, signature I never wrote, clause saying, "Mom willingly agrees to transfer." I documented every detail like I was building a legal case. Because the truth is, this was a case. I was the victim, and the perpetrators lived right outside my door. I began checking every official document I owned. I pulled out an old suitcase lined with fabric, one I once used to hide birthday gifts for Ethan when he was little. There it was, my original handwritten will, complete with my signature and date. I laid it side by side with the printed version I had found in Ethan's office. Several lines had been altered. One line in particular made my blood run cold. Mother leaves all assets to Ethan for her long-term safety. I wasn't dead. I wasn't senile. I was still alive, breathing, thinking, watching. But they were treating me like I was just an asset in liquidation. I ordered a tiny camera online, one hidden inside a picture frame. I didn't plan to spy. I just wanted some version of the truth to remain, in case one day. I could no longer speak for myself. One afternoon, I pretended to nap. I heard footsteps, slow, calculated. The door creaked open. Someone entered. I kept my eyes shut, my breath even. Then came the soft click of a drawer, a muffled whisper, the sound of retreat. When I opened my eyes, the cabinet had shifted slightly. I knew someone had gone through my things. I didn't confront them. I simply saved the footage to my phone. That night, I reread old letters Ethan had written to me as a child. I love Mom the most in the world. When I grow up, I'll buy you a big house. I'll never leave you, Mom. I read each word, my hands trembling, not from nostalgia, but from realization. The little boy I had raised was gone. The next morning, I called Carol, an old friend from the library. We hadn't spoken in years. She was surprised to hear from me. I didn't go into full detail. I simply asked, if someone forged a signature and transferred assets without permission, what rights does that person still have? Carol paused, then said softly, Maggie, if you're still mentally sound and you have proof, you can take everything back. Her words cut through me like a clean knife through fog. I looked around my tiny room. The one I was told was for my safety. But now every wall, every crack, every familiar object looked different. This wasn't a home. This was a holding cell. And I was waiting for someone to decide when I'd be quietly removed from my own life. Not anymore. That evening, I laid all the documents out on the bed. I photographed each page, backed up files to a USB drive, emailed myself everything under the subject line, Emergency Do Not Delete. And when all was done, I sat on the edge of the bed. I wrote a single line in my new journal. They think I've fallen asleep in fear. But I'm waking up now, and this time I won't be silent. They didn't know I had woken up. I still sent good morning texts, still shared cute photos of the kitten, still pretended not to know a thing, so they could keep believing I was soft, quiet, and blind. But inside, I was ready. That Saturday, Ethan and Chloe came back from a 3-day beach getaway. I heard the sound of rolling suitcases, Chloe laughing, Ethan calling out, Mom, we got you something from the trip. I stepped out from the guest house, smiling politely. That's nice. I actually have something to show you, too. Ethan paused. Chloe raised an eyebrow. I had never spoken like that before, not in the past 3 months. We sat around the dining table in the main house. For the first time in weeks, I entered their space without waiting for an invitation. I brought with me a folder, a USB stick, and an old tablet. I opened the screen, pressed play. The video began. Chloe opening my guest house drawer. Chloe holding my phone, snapping a photo of my bank password screen. Ethan placing documents on a table titled Asset Transfer Authorization. Silence filled the room for 45 seconds. Then I looked up and met my son's eyes. Would you care to explain, Ethan? Chloe jumped up first. You're invading our privacy. You're spying on us. I recorded that in my room, I replied calmly. And what you did is not private, it's criminal." Ethan gestured for her to sit down, but he couldn't look me in the eye either. "Mom, we just wanted to help. Living alone isn't safe. I thought if we managed your finances, it'd be better." "No one helps by forging signatures," I cut in. I spoke slowly, clearly, one word at a time. Each word like a stone laid across the foundation of truth. I told them about my original will, about my emails with a lawyer, about the videos, the photos, the times Chloe entered my room when I was gone. I watched Ethan's face shift with every detail. He no longer looked like the confident, successful man. He looked like a child caught stealing from his own mother. "I've updated my will," I said. "I'm not leaving anything to people who abuse me under the name of love." "So, where are you going?" Ethan asked, voice lower. "I don't have to tell you," I said. "I have a new place, a plan, and legal rights." I pulled a folded paper from my sweater, a copy of the legal filing for my revised will, and a request for an investigation into signature fraud. I laid it on the table. Then I looked directly at Ethan, longer than I ever had in my life. "You once said you'd buy me a house. Instead, you built me a cage. Well, I've opened the door to that cage." Chloe left the room without a word. Ethan stayed, hands clasped tightly. I stood up. "I'll be moving out next week. Don't try to stop me. And don't contact me unless it's absolutely necessary." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt light, like I had set down a weight I'd carried for 67 years. That night, back in the guest house, I sat in front of the mirror. I didn't see a fragile old woman. I saw a woman who had just taken her life back. And I knew when I woke up the next morning, I would never again be the kind of mother they could silence. I once thought I would leave this life quietly, like a shadow slipping past my child's world. No demands, no burdens, no trace. I used to think silence was a form of kindness, but after everything I've endured in this house, I finally understood. Not everyone who stays silent is noble. Some are just suffocated into submission. In the final week at the guest house, I packed my things in silence. I didn't inform Ethan. I didn't say goodbye to Chloe. They saw me going in and out, organizing boxes, zipping suitcases, but asked nothing. Maybe they thought I'd change my mind. Maybe they didn't believe I had the courage. They were wrong. One afternoon, I received an envelope from my lawyer. Inside was the new, fully registered will, something I had submitted days earlier, along with all the evidence. I spread it out on the small tea table. The tea that day was weak, but my signature was firm. I had waited far too long for this moment. I left everything I owned to just two names. Not Ethan, not Chloe. The first was Maria, the part-time housekeeper, the only person in that house who asked me every morning, "Did you sleep well, ma'am?" She once brought me banana bread every Monday, because she noticed I liked sweets in the morning. When I caught a cold, she left a jar of honey ginger tea at my door without a word. She never asked for anything, but gave more kindness than my own son had in years. The second was an organization called Backbone, one I had discovered just days before. They support elderly women who've suffered financial and emotional abuse within their families. I didn't share my whole story, just said, "I'm 67. My son took control of everything I had, but I still have something left, and I want it to go somewhere worthy." They didn't ask how much. They didn't ask my name. They simply replied, "You are the reason this organization exists." I read that line 3 times, and each time my eyes filled with tears. Not because I was hurt, but because I felt seen. I printed 3 copies of the will, one for the lawyer, one for Maria, and one to keep in my suitcase. The room slowly emptied out. I packed light, a few clothes, a photo of my mother, my old black tea tin, books, the USB with evidence, and Poppy, my kitten. I didn't take any family photos, no gifts from Ethan. Those had lost their meaning long ago. On the day I left, the sky was clear. Sunlight touched the guest house door gently. No one came to say goodbye, except Maria. She helped carry my suitcase to the gate. Before I left, she held my hand tightly and said, "You're the strongest woman I've ever met." I smiled. You should have seen me at 30. I once climbed a roof just to fix the antenna so my son could watch cartoons. We both laughed. But this time, the laughter wasn't bitter. It was free. I moved into a small apartment near the bus station. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a window that overlooked red-tiled rooftops. There was no dishwasher, no security system, no one else controlling the thermostat or mail. But for the first time in years, I could sleep peacefully, brew my own tea, turn on a light without asking permission. Every object in that space, from the blanket to the sound of my kitten's purr, belonged to me. I began journaling again each morning, not to record wounds, but choices. I wrote about picking a new paint color for the balcony, naming the flowers I planted, choosing the first book to reread after decades. No one interrupted me anymore. That evening, I sat on an old armchair, Poppy curled in my lap. I was no longer young, no longer the mother everyone needed, but I was me, whole, independent, unapologetic. I whispered to myself, I left nothing for the ungrateful, but I gave myself something far greater, freedom. The first morning I woke up in my new apartment, I took a few seconds to realize I wasn't in the guest house anymore. There were no creeping footsteps outside the hallway, no pressure to get out of bed quickly so I wouldn't inconvenience anyone. Just a gentle, quiet, soft sunlight through the white curtains, and little Poppy nuzzling into my hand. For the first time in years, I exhaled without feeling like I owed someone for simply being. I brewed a pot of black tea, not to please anyone, just because I liked it. I sat on the balcony, watching the city slowly wake up. No one asked, "Are you drinking that again?" No one adjusted the water temperature for me. I took a slow sip, opened my little notebook, and wrote, "Day 1, I live, not just survive, and I don't need permission to be me." Bit by bit, I began piecing my life back together from the smallest things. I returned to the public library, the one I worked at for over 30 years. But this time, I wasn't a librarian. I sat in a reader's chair, card in hand, name on the file. I reread a novel I loved when I was 22, a time when I still remembered how to love myself. I read slowly, as if I were talking to the younger woman I used to be, the one who had dreams, who had desire. Before she became the selfless mother everyone took for granted, I joined a yoga class for seniors. Our bodies trembled and bent awkwardly, but our eyes sparkled like polished glass. We couldn't bend like the young, but we knew how to rise and fall with patience. There, I befriended Nora, 74, widowed, estranged from her daughter after refusing to sell her house for money. We walked together every afternoon, shared warm meals, swapped books, and sometimes just sat in silence. One day she asked me, "Don't you ever feel lonely?" I smiled. I used to feel invisible surrounded by family. Now I'm alone, but I feel seen. That makes all the difference. I stopped texting Ethan, not out of anger, but because I had learned waiting for kindness from someone who doesn't want to give it is just another form of self-betrayal. I didn't wait for them to come back. I no longer needed their understanding. Instead, I taught neighborhood kids how to read, planted lavender, and wrote in my journal again. Every page of my journal no longer captured pain. I wrote the things I chose. I chose silence when explanations weren't owed. I chose to eat what I loved without apology. I chose to hug myself on bad days and not feel ashamed. One night I sat in my little living room, warm light casting a soft glow over Poppy asleep in my lap. I looked into a small mirror. No, I wasn't the young woman I once was, but I wasn't the silent, invisible shadow either. I saw a woman who survived betrayal, endured loneliness, and stood again on her own 2 feet. People often say, old age is about slowing down, but I believe old age is when we finally get to live for ourselves, not for roles, not for approval. I don't know how many more years I have, but I know this much. Each morning I wake up, I am no longer Ethan's mom. I am not someone needing to be supervised. I am me, and that is enough. I once left everything to my family. Now I've given the most precious thing to myself, freedom, and the quiet certainty that I am still worthy of living fully. People often ask me, how were you able to be so strong at 67? And honestly, I never know how to answer it properly. Because strength didn't arrive all at once. It was carved slowly from every unseen tear I swallowed. Every time I bit my tongue and smiled when I wanted to scream. Every night I lay curled up, knowing I was being used, but said nothing. I used to be a quiet woman, an obedient mother, an uninformed old lady. Until one day I understood, silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's the slow death of dignity. One afternoon I stood looking at the lavender I had planted. Tiny purple blossoms, fragile but bold in the sunlight. I reached out and gently touched a petal and whispered, "You know, before you bloomed, they called you a weed." I too had once been treated that way. Years of being a mother, a wife, the peacekeeper of the family, I had forgotten who I was. I lied about how I felt just to keep the dinner table quiet. I signed papers blindly, thinking my son would never hurt me. I stayed silent when disrespected, believing, I'm old, who will listen? But eventually, I learned the most important lesson. No one can bury you unless you bow your head and help them shovel. I don't write these words for sympathy. I write because I know there are thousands of women like me out there, treated as burdens by their own families, quietly stripped of control in the name of protection, slowly disappearing from their own lives. I write for them, and I write for the 30-year-old woman I once was, the one who gave too much without realizing kindness when silent is often forgotten, or worse, exploited. Sometimes I wish I had realized sooner. I wish I had walked away the first time I was betrayed. I wish I had lifted my chin when they said, "Be quiet, it's for the good of the family." But I don't regret anymore, because I stood up, while I still had the strength to write my own ending. I don't know if Ethan ever regrets anything. I don't know if Chloe ever remembers. The old woman who made her porridge after her miscarriage. Maybe they've forgotten me, or maybe I'm just a blurry memory. That stubborn old lady who moved out without a word. But I remember. I remember every look, every phrase, every moment when I let them cross boundaries I should have drawn long ago. I don't carry anger anymore, not because I forgive, but because holding on to bitterness is just another prison, and I've already escaped one. Now I live quietly. Each morning I make my tea as a little ritual. I'm still here, and I still get to choose. I plant more flowers. I write letters to women from the backbone community. I tell my story, not glamorized, not pitiful, just as it was. And I leave them with this message. If you feel forgotten, please remember you still have you, and that is everything. On my 68th birthday, I threw no party. I bought myself a small cake, stuck a single candle on top, and wrote one quiet line on a card. To the woman who stopped waiting to be saved, happy birthday.